love, 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 love. It's easy. So, despite my melodious voice, it's not very easy to actually stand and sing in front of all of you guys. But it's really easy to love these two folks, my wife and my son, Dakari. And, it's easy because I chose to marry one of them and I helped bring the other in the world, so I didn't have a choice. But there are some folks it's not that easy to love. My mother-in-law, for example, I actually love her very, very much, but it's not always easy to love her. And when we actually do this, we actually almost relegate the other person to what's now known as othering. And we come to distance them. Really, Anne talked earlier about neighbors, and we actually don't even consider them as such. Simone de Beauvoir, one of the pioneer feminists, talked about othering as once you set yourself up as the one, you automatically create the other. And we relate to them as though they don't even exist. I grew up in Jamaica, and I learned real early that the other for us were gay men. And we had the right to treat them any way that we wanted to. We could burn them, we could use machetes on them, anything that we want. In fact, I attended a Christian university in Jamaica, and my neighbors in the dormitory where I stayed, there were 4 men. They were suspected of being homosexuals. And so one night, a large group of students violently beat them. There were guns involved, machetes, and all type of things. So I learned real early that it was not safe for me to be close with other men. But it was not always the case. Once upon a time, men were actually close, physically, emotionally, and socially. We weren't afraid of being homosexualized or feminized or anything like that. Men in Nigeria used to walk and hold hands together. They don't do that anymore, of course. But there was a time when we were close. So long before Conan O'Brien went to a Korean spa, my best friend took me to one. And growing up in Jamaica, it was actually strange for me to walk around and see all of these penises. And, it was threatening a little for me, but also it introduced me to inclusive masculinity, the appreciation that we can actually, as men, be close together physically, emotionally, socially, without it being dangerous. Okay, so I sent this invitation out to a group of men to explore what it actually means to be a man, to be masculine. And, 32 men actually answered the call all across the US and Germany and Japan. And we actually met on Paget Island last September. And we came together to explore what it means to be, again, inclusive. And inclusive masculinity is really just talking about the idea that men, there's not just one way of being a man. There are multiple masculinities. And in fact, the more we align with this idea of inclusive masculinity, benefits women as well. Sophia Cannonier talked earlier about feminist empowerment. And so men who are more inclusive actually support women and gender equality and homosexuality and all of these things, okay? So once when we got on the island the first day, there was this distance, space between us that was evident. And one of the things that we decided, first of all, this wasn't shared with all the participants, but we wanted to see how, as we progressed throughout the weekend, it was a 3-day weekend, we wanted to see if the space would minimize between us men. And we obviously got really close, and what I'm now calling, undefended masculinity. We got to the point where we were no longer afraid of being seen with the other. In fact, it turned out, this wasn't planned, but it turned out that half the men were gay men and half the men were straight. And for a lot of us, it was the first time we were being in an intimate space where we could actually be in community, in conversations with the other. So men were more self-expressed. You heard me singing at the beginning. I wouldn't have done that prior to this retreat. Men were dancing for the first time, doing all sorts of things that they wouldn't have done post this opportunity. A part of the experience had men really seeing each other as well and allowing themselves to be known. this exercise here, men are really just acknowledging what they've come to know about the other men, minus their social identification or category. But who are you as a human being? We realized that a lot of the men were, sharing more responsibility. There was more ownership about how we all choose to hold the space that we created together, which everyone felt was safe, was inclusive, was respectful. And this was pretty new for a lot of the men that were there. We also discovered that there is such a thing as inclusive masculinity. Gordon talked earlier about sometimes we, as leaders, the sort of hierarchical approach is a bit outdated. So we could sit in circle and be there on Paget Island, and no one had to be the leader. We could all lead. And at the end of the retreat, as you can see, the space between us has been reduced. Men were hugging, kissing, they were fine with that. Men were holding each other. And, for me, that was transformative. It was transformative for a lot of the other men to be able to be in a space where they could experience openness, they could explore their masculinity, they could explore a way of being human without being, a particular belonging to a particular social group. And it was a vulnerable experience. A lot of the men after the retreat talked about how other areas in their lives had switched as well. So, at the end, we realized that the experience of Braveheart, I think one of the root words for courage is actually heart. And the Braveheart retreat actually opened up the space for men to journey inward and find their authentic expression of masculinity and share that with others. So as I think about the next evolution of men's relations, I have a son, he's right there, he's 9, he still kisses me, and I want him to do that when he's 50 and I'm 100, and he can do that with all his male friends as well. I don't want him to actually having to worry too much about, if I have a best male friend, would I be considered, would it be considered taboo for me to walk down the street and hold his hand? I imagine a world where it's safe for him to do that. Thank you.
Did you go through a shift in consciousness, or have you always been this human being?
Wow, that's a great question. I want to say that I've always been that way. Of course, I want to say that. I don't know if that's actually the case, right? But, it's funny. My wife and I were talking a bit about this today, and we were joking about it a bit because we, for the first time, acknowledge that she's a lot more masculine than I am. Like, she's beautiful, she is sexy, but there are certain qualities that, based on my culture, my socialization, I've related to being masculine, and same for her. She has related to being feminine. So it was like really funny when we thought, oh, well, I thought, you were a little, on the feminine side. I'm like, yeah, I can own that now, because being masculine or feminine is really on the sort of spectrum, a continuum. And we've grown up in a world where I think there's this binary. You're either a man or you're a woman. And so I've been nervous about that all my life. But I think maybe there is an awakening because now I'm not so afraid of it anymore. Any guy can walk up to me now and hug me and give me a kiss on the cheek or anything like that. My wife is actually still a little bit afraid of that, so be careful of how close you hug me. But I'm okay with it. Right, so, I hope I'm answering your question. There are both pros and cons to it. And I think at some point, men ought to go through an experience where, a healthy experience where they are with just men. It's great when I hear of men talking about being in a network of friends or a community who are just men. There's a really great film out there called 5 Friends. I would recommend all men see it. It's about how friendship really supports and sustains their life throughout their lifespan, and how it actually helps maintain their relationships with others and with themselves.